Welcome to this ICS webcast, one of an occasional number that we do here from the Oxford Internet Institute. It's my great pleasure and delight to introduce my good friend and colleague, Professor William Dutton, Bill Dutton to most of us. Bill, for many years, was at the University of Southern California at the Annenberg School of Communication. Was also director of the PICT program, a major research program in the UK, and now is director of the Oxford Internet Institute. And today, Bill is going to give us a paper on trust in the internet as an experience technology, which he wrote together with Adrian Shepherd, and of course you'll know is available as a free download, so do please click on after you've seen this webcast.
Thank you, Brian. Adrian Shepherd couldn't be here, but I'll try to do my best. What I'll try to do is just very briefly hit on some of the key ideas that the paper tries to convey. I think the puzzles are in the title, trust in the internet as an experience technology. And two major problems there. One is, what do we mean by trust? How can we possibly define trust in the internet? And hopefully we can get to that in discussion. The other is, what do we mean by an experience technology? And I think if there's a central contribution of the analysis, it's the concept of an experience technology. Does the data support that? Does that translate? Does that give us a framework for thinking much more widely about how we think about trust in information and communication technologies? What I think there are several questions that I went about trying to answer. One is, what do we mean by trust? And because this anybody who's looked at trust knows that every discipline has their own definition of trust. It's one of the most widely researched concepts in the social sciences, but political scientists, economists, others have various definitions of it. Then the substantive empirical question, do people trust the internet? Because many people feel that they shouldn't or do or don't. And is there empirical data that we could reflect on the level of trust people place in the internet? Why or why not? Why do people trust the internet? Is it a matter of social groups? Certain groups are likely to trust it, others don't. Is it the Google generation that trusts, others don't? And in light of that, what could we say about the likely future of trust in the internet? Given the range of bad media press regarding the internet and the catastrophic examples sometimes portrayed on the media, whether it's terrorism or child protection, is trust likely to be declining over time? And whether we can use this notion of an experience technology to reflect on that. Very briefly, quickly, I did in the paper, I go through a variety of definitions of trust, but I settle on a very conventional definition, which is the likelihood of a firm belief in the reliability or truth or strength of a person or thing, a confident expectation. An economist would almost insist upon many other conditions, there being some uncertainty, exposure, temptation to violate trust, say in a sales relationship over eBay, for example. There's a trust situation. It's a temptation not to give the product or to misrepresent the product and so forth. How do you trust that? But I think conventionally most people define trust as you're uncertain about something or you're certain something is not trustworthy. For you believe a particular newspaper is not trustworthy means you don't know of its veracity or you actually know that it's biased for a particular leaning or another. So I'm trying to keep that conventional definition, knowing that in survey research, trust is what people perceive it to be and how they answer questions. But we didn't ask questions about trust per se. But before I get to how we measure trust, we came at this not just as a fishing expedition. We had a theoretical expectation. Most of the time when I speak to people about trust in the internet, they take a theoretical position that's very, very conventional of saying that mediated communications are going to be less trustworthy than non-mediated. People trust face-to-face communication. There's something normatively ideal about that, and that if you put technology in between people, people feel that they're going to be less trusting. I think, decades of research on the telephone, on video conferencing, on a variety of other media question that relationship. Sometimes people will trust people more online, or so I don't think that technologically deterministic view of whether people are going to trust or distrust, have lower levels of trust online and are not, takes us very far. So we began this with a conception of what we called the certainty trough. Donald McKinsey developed the concept of a certainty trough in his work in another area, but essentially the concept of a certainty trough is that when people are very distant from a technology, they tend to distrust it. As they learn more, become more proximate to a technology, they trust it more. But those closest, most clearly connected to a technology, are often the more uncertain. So there's a trough that he looked at missile guidance systems, and he said that people who know nothing about missile guidance systems are very distrusting of missile guidance. The generals and others who use the technology, who employ the technology, might be more trusting, but the scientists who are actually working on targeting guided missiles have a lot of uncertainty. So there's a trough. So it's not a linear relationship between proximity and trust. And that's sort of the theoretical framework. We thought that actually people that have no connection to the internet might be distrusting, but those people most involved in internet use might also be distrusting. It's those people in the middle with some exposure that would be. So is the certainty trough explaining certainty? So we reframed the question as, does distrust or trust relate to the proximity people have to the internet? And as over time, as people become more proximate, as the internet becomes more of an infrastructure of everyday life, will actually the internet, will that change trust because of this great shift in the proximity of the internet in everyday life? The data we utilize for this are, most of what I'll talk about, the paper is based on the 2003 Oxford Internet Surveys called OxIS 2003. And then I'll reflect a bit on some of our more recent data from 2005 and some questions about what we'll find in 2007. But these were based on face-to-face interviews with people 14 years old and older, projectable to Britain, Wales, Scotland, and England. And it's a sample of, we've got a variety of sponsorship, but it's a cross-sectional survey. It's not a panel. So we interviewed a random sample in both 2003 and 2005. So we'd have the best estimates we could of the actual population. We had an excellent response rate, 66% in 2003, 72% 2005. And we think we have a very high quality database, both because it's face-to-face interviews, it's a projectable sample, and it's also a high response rate. So we have trust or confidence in our results as a survey. Just as a slight segue in terms of what is the internet use in Britain, many people may not have any background in Britain. We have fewer internet users, or people who have access to the internet. They're less likely to have access to the internet in Britain than, say, in the United States. We have about 60% of people online. What's interesting about it is between 2003 and 2005, there was a plateau of internet users in Britain. In the US, for example, it's closer to 70%, just hovering over 70%. But again, it's plateaued in the US as well, and it's primarily connected to access to PCs in the home. About 8% are people who used to use the internet and no longer use it, what we call lapsed users, and I'll get back to that. But about a third of the population in Britain have not used the internet. And those categories of current users, lapsed users, non-users are the essential differences between proximity to the internet. The other is whether or not they have broadband. In 2003, only 20% of the UK internet using population had broadband access to the internet. In 2005, that rose to 60%. So it was a major shift in the diffusion of broadband between 2003 and 2005. But in 2003, when you see broadband users, that's the 20% of users who were really the most, the leading edge in terms of using the internet in the household, which now is the conventional access. Another point of just sort of context for the UK is, like other countries, age is a huge factor in whether or not people have exposure to the internet. So you have a complication in terms of if non-users are more or less distrusting, they're also more likely to be older. 98% of people in Britain who are school age or in school use the internet, compared to 30% of those who are retired or of retirement age. So age is something that we can bring up, but we've controlled for in the results. Okay, how do we measure trust? We pulled together questions in the OxIS survey that related to trust in the internet from that conventional definition, and we did a factor analysis, which is reported in the paper. But the interesting part of that is that it unraveled to be two empirically distinct factors or clusters of items that related to trust. One we called net confidence, because it relates in how their confidence in the reliability of the internet, the kinds of people that they can meet online, the kinds of people who provide internet services. So what we called that net confidence. The second factor, which is independent of that, was the risk people felt that they were exposed to online. So they can have confidence in the reliability of information on the internet, but they can see themselves at risk to privacy violations or not at risk. So these are two, for example, or at risk of being fooled by the quality of an item they might purchase online. So there's this element of risk, which is a separate one dimension of trust. The other was confidence. And empirically, I'll try to distinguish those two, because it actually comes out different factors are related to these two different elements of trust. What the general pattern we found, and I'll just give you one example and I'll focus on the reliability of information, is that if you look at this table one, you see non-users, past users, narrowband, broadband. That's essentially in order of sort of proximity to the internet in a sense. Non-users, when we ask them how reliable information is on the internet that they can get access to online, non-users don't know. So literally over 30% of them had no opinion whatsoever. And that's a really dramatic difference. Even past users are more likely to have an opinion. So the first instance is there's high levels of uncertainty about non-users, less so about past users. But anybody who's used the internet, narrowband or broadband, is more likely to have an opinion. The second aspect of that is those who had an opinion, non-users are more distrusting. Okay, so non-users have the lowest mean rating of the reliability of information they can get online. Past users are more likely to say that you can get good information online, reliable information online. And again, the users are the most trusting of the kinds of information they can get. So those two patterns, one, and it relates exactly to the conventional definition of trust, is that uncertainty, or if they have an opinion, more negative, the more distant they are from computing. Now, what's interesting is we didn't see evidence of a certainty trough. We didn't see that broadband users are somehow less trusting than narrowband users, or that more time you spend online, the more distrusting you are. Or, in fact, we saw no evidence within the range of sample that we had of a certainty trough. We just found that as you gain experience online, you're more likely to have a learned level of trust in the internet. And what do I mean by a learned level of trust? We thought maybe, for example, one possible alternative explanation is people who use the internet are just more trusting of media generally. But here you look at trust in newspapers, television, and the internet. People who, narrowband and broadband users, are about as trusting of the internet as they are of television news. and they're more trusting of the internet than they are of newspaper coverage. And but you can see its distinction between non-users, past users, and broadband users in their level of trust in the internet, but there's no difference among those groups in their trust of television or newspapers. So it's not just a matter of that broadband users are more trusting of all media. They simply are more trusting of the internet that they have experience with. And so these patterns of experience with the internet affecting uncertainty and confidence in the reliability led to this. You can see that where the experience technology concept comes from. Similarly with risks, perceived risks, broadband users are more likely to disagree about perceived risks of being online. The non-users are more likely to perceive higher levels of risk. So again, net risks are related to experience. This is the level of risk people perceive. And the same thing happens when you look at uncertainty. People who are non-users are more uncertain about levels of risk. Now, if you do with a multivariate analysis, where we take all the demographic variables related to trust in the internet and so forth, we also find, for example, net confidence. If you use broadband or narrowband or you're a dropout, those are the most likely predictors of level of trust. For example, there's a relationship of age and trust, but if you control for experience using the internet, age has no relationship to trust in the internet, nor does any other demographic category. The only other demographic category that arises is education. So more educated individuals are more distrusting of the reliability of information that they, or the confidence. So more educated people are more skeptical, but in any given level of education, the more experienced people have the internet, the more experienced they are, the more trusting they are. Inversely, net risk. The more experience you have with the internet, the more likely you disagree with the level of risk, so that you're less likely to feel that you're exposed to a risk if you have more experience. But if you're more educated, you feel more likely that you're exposed to a risk. So education and experience with the technology come out in both cases. You can see that experience, that means, and as you get more experience, you have more trust. And to validate that, you can also see that if you look at the World Internet Project and other data, people who have more experience online, this separates people with less than 1 year and 5 or more years of experience. You can see a dramatic difference in the level of shopping online between those with little or more experience. So experience is not just an attitude, it actually translates in what people do online. With experienced users more likely to purchase online than less experienced users. And therefore you can see that as over time people get more proximate, more experience online, they'll be doing more things than they do now. And a wrinkle in this, and which is really an interesting dynamic to watch in the future, is that people also have bad experiences online in terms of being exposed to viruses, spam, fraudulent messages, and so forth. Actually, the level of exposure to this is probably lower than many of you would expect. I mean, because most people around the Oxford Internet Institute are using the internet more and probably have more than 47% in our institute of getting spam messages. But we added up the number of bad experiences people said they reported, and exposure to bad experiences online undermine trust, undermine confidence in the internet. So you've got two countervailing forces. You've got one is experience generally provides a greater level of trust in the technology. However, bad experiences countervail that tendency. So you can see both factors operating simultaneously, which validates a lot of the efforts of people to try to develop technologies and training to minimize bad experiences online. So in summary, we found that there's no blind faith in the internet, but trust is related to experience. It's not a certainty trough. We don't see that much evidence for a certainty trough as opposed to an experience technology. Education and experience are the major factors explaining that. Levels of trust, but the bad experiences undermine trust. So, what would we think, therefore, from 2003 to 2005, bad experiences reported in the press, what happens? Does trust in the internet precipitously decline? Or what? What do we find? Well, how reliable and accurate would you say information is on the internet? Greater trust in 2005 than 2003. It's increased. You can see from the mean reliability rating of information. Let me take the other two items. Actually, also you can see uncertainty is still very high. Uncertainty over the reliability of non-users have a high level of uncertainty. So again, experience technology seems to work in terms of having an opinion, but if you have an opinion, in 2005 you're more likely to be positive about the reliability of information. Here's about how much confidence you have in the people providing internet services. Again, it's increased. Even internet service providers cannot believe that, that figure, because they're hearing complaints or whatever, but yet internet providers actually have a higher level of confidence from internet users than before. And now this is not just users, this is the entire population of non-users as well as users. And finally, people online, the people you can meet online. Even the bad press about worrisome concerns over who you meet online, that has risen also from 2003 to 2005. There's more trust. However, just to sort of ground this in that it's not that it's has some validity, people are less likely to trust people they meet online than people in their country generally, or scientists or doctors, for example. The people known to them have the highest level of trust, but people that they meet online, the trust in that who they can meet online is actually increased. To me, that suggests that experience technology helps to explain that a bit. That is, that over time people have gained experience, they have more proximity to the internet, there's more of a sense of overall trust. But an interesting wrinkle in this is that perceived risks have actually increased too. So that you have both greater levels of confidence in the ability to find reliable information and find people, etc., but also a greater sense of exposure to risks from privacy, fraud, other things. So I think that it seems like the context has changed in which you have more sense of a powerful technology and people realizing the internet is a credible, powerful technology, but it's a two-edged sword. That is, they can find information about people that they go, wow, I can find out who Bill Dutton is and where he is and so forth. Well, they turn that around in terms of concern over their own privacy and own potential risk of surveillance, etc. So going online puts privacy at risk, slightly increased. It's difficult to assess product quality online, slightly increased. So maybe the risks have gone too. So that's it. I think our major contribution is this notion of an experience technology, and it'd be interesting to see if people think that that's something that we've empirically established, and also this shift in the larger context of opinion, because I don't think we would have necessarily predicted this increase in concern over privacy based upon the experience technology alone. I think there's also a shift in the overall concern over worries on the internet. So it could well be what we've sometimes referred to as a privacy trust tension. In order to trust things more, we include more information also about people's identity and who they are, and we worry about more who they are. But then the more we try to identify people, check on people, the more we think that actually we're violating the privacy of others. And so there's this tension between gaining more confidence in the information and violating the privacy of communications. And there's, we're seeing some of this confusion over the power of the technology coming out in the data. But if there are questions, otherwise I think that conveys sort of the key points of the article.
That's great, thanks Bill. I'd like to open it up for a short discussion. Just before we do that, are you suggesting then that in a sense there's an ambiguous relationship between the population in general and the internet? That it may be concerned, at least that even the high users may be concerned, but they can, if you like, deal with that complexity. They can deal with the kind of positive sides that they gain from it through greater experience. That there's a kind of working out of that ambiguity in some sense.
Well, first of all, it's multidimensional. I mean, trust is not one dimension, and so I think risk and confidence at least begin to get at that. They're the different aspects of trust. The other is that I wouldn't call it ambiguity, but I think that it's really countered this notion that trust is somehow a linear thing, that we want to increase trust in a technology. Actually, what we find is that people move to sort of what we call the learned level of trust, which has some distrust. You know, in other words, it's probably healthy to have a level of skepticism about any technology. You could be too trusting or too confident in a technology, and I think so. You can see. So it's not, trust not as just an ever-increasing linear kind of relationship, but somehow people move. We even say it's not statistically significant, so I didn't mention it much, but you can even see kids who are extremely positive about a technology with more experience becoming less, so that kids with no experience are predisposed to be very optimistic about the technology. Kids with more experience online have a more realistic sense of the technology, while older people predisposed to have a very negative. So everybody sort of moves to a sort of what I would call a learned level of trust, which is some mix of skepticism and confidence. But they know they can buy online, they know they can get a good product, but they are aware of potential risks. And I think that's a healthy actual. But
it does have interesting implications in terms of the debate around the digital divide. I mean, a lot of the research in recent years has suggested, particularly as the government in the UK is happy to say there is no digital divide anymore, anybody who wants to have access to the internet can now gain access through various public centres and the costs of internet access coming down. But it clearly isn't just about access, and this seems to suggest, as other people have suggested, that for a lot of people, they just don't think it's relevant to their everyday experience. So they're not going to get that experience that you're suggesting is needed. So for a government, like lots of other governments around the world, investing huge amounts of money, not to say faith, in e-government agendas, whereby they're hoping that particularly those groups of the population that are not gaining experience of the internet, are not going online, but who they would like to go online in order to actually gain access to those services. They tend to be the people that use those services more. There's a real problem there, it seems. Yeah.
No, I think that's really probably the central policy or central question for policy or practice is how do you get people who think that the internet is uninteresting or untrustworthy to experience the technology? And it's if you know that it is an experience technology, and if they did get some experience, they would probably, their attitudes might change. It's a real, it's not because everyone accuses me of trying to get everybody online, and I actually am not trying to get everybody online. I'm trying to get everybody to make an opinion about whether the technology is useful to them or that whether the internet can be of use to them. But the problem is you do not make an informed decision unless you have some experience with the technology. We've all been in a situation where somebody can describe to you what you can do on the web or what you can do online, and then you sit down and you actually do it and you go, wow, I don't know, some people call it the wow factor or whatever, but that's what you really do experience, that where you get it. When somebody describes it to you, it's, oh, well, you can get access to computers around the world and that's interesting. But then you sit down and look at maps or use a search engine, and you're quite impressed. And that kind of experience is not replaceable by just simply somebody saying, you may be uninterested in the internet, but I can guarantee you'll find great value in it. But you need to get people to sit down and learn it. So yeah, it's actually easier to deal with the digital divide in that situation, because it's not a matter of building new infrastructure. It's not a matter of more wires or more hardware. It's a matter of, but it's an equally challenging problem of how do you get people to have experience with a technology they are predisposed to think is uninteresting and unimportant to them.
And it's frequently the case it's not technology per se. They will often use mobile phones, for example. That still doesn't mean that they feel that the internet is relevant to them. But other forms of media may be highly relevant. Anyway, the only other...
Bill, that's really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that people are becoming more sceptical, because that is the root of Europe, I think. Europe is built on scepticism, Voltaireism.
Excellent.
I'm glad to hear
Well,
that.
hear.
What I want to ask is if you could help me clarify, because I sense there are two different types of trust going along, and I think that you have identified them as separate, but maybe your separateness isn't the same as my separateness. I think that there is trust in getting knowledge and information which is correct, which is up to date.
Yeah.
And then there is trust in making use of the internet, primarily in commercial transactions, or organising your life. And I think those are two different types of trust. So on the one, the getting information, you're finding out the dates of a historical figure or so on. I mean, you can build up trust, or it can decline depending on in a way your experience. Because you can get you can say these sites are useless, these are trusted sites. They're Oxford University, the BBC, the Guardian. This is an Elvis Presley fan. I'm not going to on that. So there's that kind of trust. But on the commercial side, I think that again there's a kind of a wave in my view. It's generally getting better as people get more sophisticated. But equally, as you suggest, the more information allows maybe hacking on one side, or more clever putting together of ways of beating the system. So do you think that I'm right in saying that there's you're measuring two different kinds of trust? And I'm wondering if that is an explicit separation in your work, or have I mean, is it interesting?
Well, we have some data on exactly what people use the internet for, and including whether they plan trips and so forth. So we could look at the relationship of trust and reliability of information and whether they use it in that way. We don't ask them necessarily how confident are you in the instructions. That would actually be a very would you follow the instructions of a computer-generated map that you locate on the internet, or and better ways of asking about trust or confidence in information. It could well be, but I guess my hypothesis would be that it would be highly correlated with trust in the information. Because I mean, I'm sure you're also equally skeptical of the information you get online. I mean, you say you might. I would imagine that you'd be knowing you. I would think you'd say some of it's worthless, some of it is excellent, and you'd be a skeptical user of any information you get online.
Except when I go to a trusted site.
Or
a trusted site. And I think those are magic domains, and I think that one of the big tasks of those connected to the internet. I mean, it's happening automatically. The market, in a way, determines it to some extent. But I think scholars, and particularly universities, have to develop the notion of a magic domain, which is essentially correct. If there's a mistake in it, it's the mistake of scholarship. It's that you didn't know it, or that wasn't discovered, or that letter wasn't known. It's not through clumsiness or through an experience.
Well, one of the things that I wonder about in terms of the validity of our data is that, say, as people have more experience online, they may customize. Well, just take some of the internet service providers and where you can customize your homepage. Okay, so if you customize your homepage where you're comfortable with it, it has your trusted news site, your trusted search engine, your trusted chat rooms and so forth. Well, then maybe you create your own environment which you trust. And so what does it mean when you say you trust the internet? Well, you trust...
I trust these particular...
Yes, and we obviously don't get at that, but I think we can do maybe some qualitative work to see.
But can we explore that a little bit further, perhaps? Because in some senses, if we take the example of, say, medical information, that runs counter to an idea that was quite, people were quite confident about, I suppose, a few years ago, that a lot of medical information is highly contested, and that in some senses, and I'll come back to this as a separate question about what you mean by educated, because arguably to be educated is to be sceptical, it's to be trained to be sceptical about information. That might be a distinguishing feature. But if we take the case of medical information, these days I guess a lot of the internet has been colonized by official type reliable sites that the medical profession themselves were very concerned about, but was often interpreted as the profession being a little bit concerned about being challenged. The difficulty there is what's then happened to those kind of alternative competing conceptions, particularly in areas where it might be a good thing that health is contested.
Or marginal discoveries.
Because
the internet has been used by people who aren't being cured.
Yeah.
So they're going worldwide to find the one cure in Brazil, the one cure in Canada.
But they might be easier to find in the sense that the more common conditions, isn't there some sort of statistic that we don't go down the screen very much on a Google search, so we probably just do a few and then we get bored, or we've just read the same thing so we figure that's okay. And I don't know, whenever, on rare occasions, I access medical information, it always, they all seem consistent, and you think, well, that's good, this is reliable, they're all saying the same thing, they've all got nice logos, and, it's the American this, that, and the other, or the British Medical Society, or whatever, and you get what you probably need, but you don't come across that kind of contested self-help, alternative view sort of thing. You'd have to scroll down a lot, I would guess.
I don't know. I mean, a neighbor of mine, an anecdote, his wife was ill, and so he went on the internet, and of course he knew I was at the Oxford Internet Institute. He said, there is such junk about this disease on the internet. I read everything I could find on the internet about this, and I've concluded such and such. And he was saying two things at the same time. One, there's a bunch of junk and a bunch of good stuff on the internet about his wife's illness. He read everything that he could find about it, and he came away with a better understanding of what she had, and
high interpretation skill.
Yes, and so I mean, he did go beyond the first link or but again, this is one thing, that kind of complexity. Survey research is very difficult to get at that kind of these mixed attitudes and mixed situations which come out of some more qualitative research, but yet it's, I would imagine, how would he answer that question? He would not have been blind. He would not have shown blind trust in the internet, and that's what we generally found in the survey, that there was no group really illustrated a blind level of trust, and. But it's just a reason why we need to complement survey research with more qualitative research, I think.
Okay. There's a little bit of a paradox latent in the presentation that you sort of allude to, that people seem to be properly or maybe overly paranoid about the technology and the ways in which it can harm them or they can be harmed through it. But at the same time, they often behave as if it's completely secure in the sense of they're not being monitored. people will access websites that they would never dream of walking into a store and purchasing the corresponding magazine. In a way, because they're doing it in the privacy of their own home, even though they would freely concede in a survey that, oh yeah, I assume that everything I'm doing is somehow being watched by somebody. And I recall a study from the early 90s by Sarah Kiesler at CMU, who did a series of interviews, some of which were face-to-face, some of which were room-to-room, where the person was one room over and they did a teletype. And she documented that people were much more forthcoming over the teletype than they were when talking to her face-to-face. She was able to make them more reticent by simply modifying what the teletype screen was displaying to have a blinking cassette icon as they were typing, and that made them clam right up. So I'm just curious what you think might account for people being as willing to take personal risk online, whether it's shopping or surfing or querying or acting out, given how much they know it is insecure.
No, that's a really good question. But I think that's not necessarily, I think that has more to do with the perceived social presence of the medium. I mean, I think it's a different, more likely to, well, for example, in personal conversation, people are more likely to be influenced by the status of one individual or another, or the social norms. And if you're alone in your home and you're just you and a computer, you may say things you wouldn't otherwise say, and because you don't feel the presence of another person in the room in that sense. And I think that's why it's an explanation for flaming. It's an explanation. But now, I haven't really linked that carefully to confidence in the internet. I mean, I know I can find anything I want on the internet, but then there's another level of, is it right to look for anything I want on the internet, or am I being observed in doing that?
I almost think of it as, can the internet have confidence in you, in the sense that the you it sees, how much does that match the you the rest of the world sees when you interact with it in more traditional forms? I almost feel like the natural thing to do is to hold the identity constant. We assume it's the same person, and then say, well, how do you find television versus how do you find newspaper versus internet? But in fact, the you that is finding each of these things in a way changes by venue.
You become a gambler, or
right.
Well, but that's in real life as well, right?
I wonder.
You walk in a casino, or you.
I think there are more gamblers in the online world than there are in the physical world. Even people who walk through a casino on their way to the airport, I think, and this is a hypothesis, right? This is the kind of thing we would test, that fewer of them would give in and go over to the table and play than might find themselves signing up for partypoker.com.
Maybe, but we have a hard time getting good evidence. Even, well, for example, this is distantly related to that. When we had face-to-face interviews, and we're asking people, do they gamble online?
Oh no.
Okay. So are they more like? So my data is immediately suspect, given your theory. Because
so what you want is a little box you can install on their box that actually measures where they go online.
That's right.
And then you unhook their identity from it, but then you can actually watch the sites. That's like that trove that AOL released, much to its regret, of searches that had been done.
Yeah. But we did find that the gambling was very interesting, because we found that the people who gamble online tend to be younger men with full-time jobs, and they have the profile of risk takers. And I think in a way that it pushed us to think about the whole internet experience as risk-taking in the especially the early days. And it's exactly, much of the profile of the online gambler today is the profile of the internet user in the early days of the internet. They were willing to take risks. But as it becomes more of a experienced technology, it becomes less risky, and as it becomes more of an infrastructure of everyday life that's taken for granted rather than something exceptional that you do, it'll change the demography of the population.
It could also be interesting, just quickly, it would also be interesting to see if there are differential levels of trust of the technology as the artifact used to get onto the network becomes more appliance-sized.
Yeah.
If you're using a dedicated, either a BlackBerry or a mobile phone or one of these network boxes, do you somehow trust it more because maybe it is a little more secure than one of these PCs that can do anything at any moment?
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be, I mean, and again, there's a whole level of studies of trust and confidence that we didn't at all get at, which would be, I mean, some people are doing experiments with whether people trust one web page as opposed to another web page, for example, given the branding of it, or do they somehow BBC Online, do they trust more than they do another news provider? And again, you could look at the kind of appliance like technology versus general purpose.
So some people could actually be more discerning about which bits they trust, which parts they actually trust. Yeah.
I think the more general topic we're discussing here is how actually people state their level of trust in the survey and how they actually then transform this into observable behavior in the internet. And I'm aware of some research from the privacy area where people have, when being asked about their privacy concerns, very high levels of privacy concerns. But then if they were in the online world and if you really surveyed or watched them, how they actually behave, what kind of data they disclose voluntarily, this was like a totally different way. So I know we already discussed about this trust in medical information.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any other, let's say, categories of where the levels of trust you found in your survey actually reflected in tangible behavior of the users?
Yeah. Yes, we can controlling for other factors. The more trust people have in the internet, the more likely they are to shop online, for example. So, but what you're raising is another phenomena, which is common offline and online, which is that people, this has been for decades in research on privacy, for example. People say, they've always said that they have a fairly high level of concern over their personal privacy, of unauthorized disclosure of personal information, etc. In fact, 1950s, 60s, banks thought that people would never use credit cards because that would violate the concerns over privacy, and they were wrong. People are concerned, but they will value their convenience, public safety, so many other things they value more than privacy, which is worrisome to anybody that's concerned over civil liberties and privacy, is that people give up privacy because it's more convenient to do it this way. It's difficult to do it another way. Everyone, for the last 3 decades, everyone says if you give up your privacy to become part of the credit, to take out credit and
Have a high
loans.
credit rating. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
of course, everybody. It's almost impossible not to. So it's this disjunction between their attitudes and fears, but what they're willing to give up in order to participate, to use services that are, how do they avoid it? The comment is just generally the general phrase is that concern over privacy is a mile wide and an inch deep, which is huge concern, because how much will we give up because it's convenient to do so?
And do you think this is comparable to the trust concept, or is this something totally different then?
No, what we're seeing now is that as people understand more and they have more confidence in how powerful the internet is as a tool for finding information, for buying products, they have somewhat more concern over privacy, and so that because they know that it is a power, it can be used to get information about themselves. So I don't know where the right balance of that will be, and I think it's. But if people have bad experiences online, it's going to undermine that. And so I think it's a juggling act in terms of trying to make sure that we have privacy protection technologies and other technologies and practices, user practices that will diminish the number of bad experiences people have online.
Just before we end,
Okay.
Bill, can we just clarify one issue that you make? If I understand you correctly, you're saying that experience is the most important thing for internet usage as compared to social demographics. And yet you also say, or I thought you said, that education was also an important player.
Yeah. No,
Now,
education.
let's just have a
and
look at the
experience.
relationship between education and social demographics then.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we were to say that there is a relationship between social demographics and higher levels of education, doesn't that still make the link, potentially?
Well, if you control for education and experience with the technology, other variables don't have any independent relationship. So, but again, they work different. I mean, education has a negative effect on confidence and experience a positive effect, but they both have a independent relationship. But for example, things that you would think other demographic, age has no connection. It's an amazing thing because clearly older people are much less likely to be lack confidence in the internet. But if older people with experience online are no less confident in the technology than the Google generation. so it's I think some of the demographic stereotypes of trust in the technology and facility is actually misunderstanding experience with the technology and translating that into age. It's just that younger people tend to have more experience and more skill in using the technology. If you control for that, they are no more or less likely to be confident in their ability or the value of the technology.
Okay, great. Thanks very much indeed.